Good evening, everyone. Welcome to dtalks or the Disruptive Talks on Education. I'm your host, Mashood. Um, at dtalks, we celebrate some ideas, organizations, and individuals who have been leading disruptive change in the field of education. And we started this journey with people from all different sections and sections of society, different stakeholders that work not just in the government or the education sector, but also in foundations, representatives from corporates, leaders, and also young people who have been transforming education in all parts of the world. And one question which emerges from all these discussions is, and one such outcome that has been coming out from these talks is to also kind of rethink on how we understand the very principles of education. Education which has transformed and has gone through so many of different plethora of changes, of transformations, of metamorphosis. But in the 21st century, what are some of the basic values and principles that should define how education is transacted? What is the goal of education? And how we need to now approach education, especially post the crisis of the pandemic. And today we have a very special guest. He is leading from the front at the JSW Foundation. He's the Chief Executive Officer, and the foundation itself has really, invested its heart and soul in education, and also a very different kind of an education which is built on values. Our guest today, he himself has been a person of very rich experience. Before JSW Foundation, he has nearly more than 3 decades of experience in working across countries in India, Asia, Africa, and many other development organizations such as the United Nations, IFC, World Bank, and several corporates as well. And he has been a true leader as well in the corporate social responsibility sector here in India, and is also in our as you will realize in today's talk, is also a philosopher on how education on education and how education needs to be transacted in the current time. So with this, I would like to welcome Mr. Ashwini Saxena. Ashwini ji, really an honor to have you here at the Disruptive Talks, and we look forward to your disruptive idea and vision of change in education.
Thank you, Maksud. Good evening, namaskar to everyone. Uh, it's a it's a ritual that you are introduced in such a big way that you start wondering whether it's really you or you're being talked about somebody else. Uh, and I think the topic itself is quite disruptive. That how the education system that we talk about today needs to be looked at. Uh, Friends, I would begin with something which I read in a school, in a small place somewhere in Badmer district of Rajasthan. Badmer itself being at the frontier location of Indo-Pak border, and I happened to work there for some time when I was with IFC. So I went to a school, and there I read a kind of a Vedic shlok there, written on the walls of the school, which kind of stuck me and has kind of stayed with me. And I think when I talk about education, that phrase always kind of becomes my guiding light, and it guides me also a lot in a sense. So it goes something like this, and I'm sure many of you must have heard of it. It says Vidyam dadati vinayam vinyad yati patratam patrat vat dharmapnoti dhanat dharmam tat sukham. Basically meaning that Vidya, which means education, विद्या विनय देती है, विनय से पात्रता मिलती है, पात्रता से धन, और धन से धर्म, और धर्म से सुख प्राप्त होता है. I mean, so the education basically gives you humility. It gives you, and I think humility is just personification of one value, one virtue for human beings. And when you become humble, when your knowledge makes you humble, just education is an alien word in that sense. So when I say vidya perhaps basically means knowledge. So knowledge gives you that humility. That humility makes you a good receptacle, and when you become a good receptacle, I think the way you are able to acquire wealth, dhan again cannot be looked at as a symbolical sense of wealth. So you will be able to create wealth which could not be just economic wealth but a whole range of wealth, wealth of ideas, wealth of um wealth in its material sense, and so on and so forth. And that would help you achieve what you want to achieve in this world, the purpose, the real purpose for which you have been sent in this world, which is your dharma or dharma as we call it, and that would give you the real satisfaction, sukh as we call it. So I think if we look at the disruption of education today, the disruption has happened at the very connect of the purpose of education and the way the education has got connected to only material pursuits, if I may say. So Vinay has gone away somewhere, perhaps. We are not bothered about whether we are capable, the right receptacles or not. So Patrita is also gone. So the direct correlation today that we unfortunately have seems to have created is that Vidyam Dadati Dhanam, and Dhanam gives me titillation, not satisfaction, not sukh. So I think that's where I think the disconnect lies, and that's where I think the disruption has already happened. And it's not that this is coming from our own philosophy only. If you read what Aristotle writes, or Plato says, or Socrates says, they say education's purpose is acquisition of knowledge. I think they say that very clearly. This is exactly what Bible also says, that we need to know about God, and we need to know why we are in this world, and it should help us define our purpose in our lives, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure same is the logic in other literatures also, wherever we go. So across all kinds of cultural contexts, geographical locations, the real purpose of education seems to have got diluted from what it was originally thought about. And therefore, to me, the basic purpose of education, I think, needs to be redefined. Why? What do we call education? And do we really fully understand the meaning of the word education or not? That's my first so-called disruptive thought process. It's a question that I ask myself, and I'm posing this question to all of us as a group, to see if we believe that we have some clear clue or answer about it. So my discussion today, and whatever way Mashud must have structured it for him, for me and all of you, my focus would be on two broad concepts, or rather three, I would say. So first is the very purpose of education, with that shlok that I could recite for you, and the way I think it means a certain thing for all of us. The second part is the curricular part of it. What is education today? So I'm trying to unfold the whole idea that what should be actually education all about, rather than just making us job ready in that sense. So that's my second point that I would like to touch upon. And third, given the context in which we are today, are there any structural issues also when we talk about education in its true sense? So if those structural issues or deformities do exist, or there are gaps there, then perhaps what needs to be done, or perhaps at least if we can understand those issues, maybe we'll be able to find out some answers around that. So I think that's where I'm touching upon. So as I said, purpose is, I think we need to redefine whether education, the way we look at it, is it about uh, only acquiring education uh, s- skill sets for turning us into economic engines of income. If that is the sole purpose of education, then I think it's a very myopic view of looking at education, because to me, education should be creating a whole range of virtues in a human being, from moral values to a whole range of other things which make this whole life holistic, and not just into a money churning individual. I think that's the whole pursuit of our education today has become about becoming job ready or being ready to start something which is going to churn uh, you know uh, economic returns out of it. So I think that limited understanding and that limited purpose of education is, I think, withholding us to achieve our real true potential. uh, the second part, which I would say comes to the curriculum part of it. If we see, as I said, education should be focusing ultimately on creating fine human beings in the society. So if you're talking about an educational policy, or if you're trying to look at uh, education only from the lens of economic returns, then I think that's a very big limitation, because equal or perhaps more emphasis needs to be put on how to create social justice, how to have harmony. We do talk about the Gini coefficient. We do talk about how disparity and the difference between the haves and the have-nots is increasing. It's increasing because everyone is on his own, and therefore everyone is on his or her own to make sure that maximum return is acquired in terms of only economic returns, even if it is at the cost of lesser economic returns for the other individuals. I'm not talking about a socialistic pattern, but there needs to be some kind of an emphasis on what do we really mean by social justice, and how do we achieve it. Because we all understand that very well, that if so is the case, if you do not have justice prevailing, if you do not have a social harmony prevailing, the material possessions perhaps will not be able to give you even that intended satisfaction, or I would say uh, the intended satisfaction and sukh out of it. I mean, you'll not be able to enjoy that enjoyment that for which you are acquiring all that wealth. Perhaps you can't do that. So therefore it's important for us to look at whether we are talking about education only from the limitations of becoming ready for job markets, or whether it is something more, whether it is becoming more holistic or not. And believe me, there are lots and lots of reasons to be telling us that our own narrow view of education has limited our own abilities in a sense. uh, there are lots and lots of researches available which talk about that the whole purpose of education, and I again refer to which is there in the ancient scriptures also, that there has to be a focus on two kinds of reasonings. Because if education is even about developing the human brain to its best potential, it needs to be developed both for deductive and inductive reasoning, because that is what is going to help you become a good decision maker. Whether you do business or whether you do a job, you need to have reasoning ability, you need to have comprehension ability. And I think n number of documents, n number of researches have been done where they very clearly know that deductive reasoning comes through mathematics, because you're able to see certain patterns, and it is the inductive reasoning which basically comes through arts and music and all those pursuits which are called as fine arts, because that helps you understand abstract. And I think there's a book by a great Nobel laureate. I am trying to chew that book as much as I can. I think it's by one of these Nobel laureates. The title of the book is Think Fast, Think Slow, where he very clearly tells how effectively you can use your brain's left side and the right side, the inductive reasoning and the deductive reasoning part, uh, which is going to help you do much more than what you think you are doing right now or you are capable of doing. So in a sense, today if we talk to somebody, what is about curriculum, the curriculum is largely about comprehension. It talks about mathematical ability, and it talks about science. But if you talk about music, if you talk about fine arts, if you talk about yoga, if you talk about sports, they've been put, we call them as extracurricular activities. So the disruption that we have created in the holistic education itself, by calling it curricular activity and extracurricular activity, or rather non-curricular activity, I think that disruption itself is creating all that challenge to all of us. And I think as we will move further, I'll tell you, where all this comes from. There are scientific studies done by scientists very clearly showing that how the musical ability or the ability to understand abstract and decipher abstract has also helped in looking at complex mathematical problems being solved by those individuals. So there is a very strong correlation between the so-called extracurricular activities, which is music and fine arts and performing arts and so on and so forth, with these the subjects like science and mathematics and comprehension, which is important. And when we talk about comprehension, again, I'm trying to get into every single word and its meaning. According to me, comprehension is not just about understanding a language, being able to read it or write it and listen to it. Comprehension is a much broader concept. Language is just one medium to help you develop your comprehension capabilities, but comprehension is much more. It talks about being able to understand, connect, and be empathetic towards your environment, to the individuals that you're dealing with. And I think the entire comprehension ability is going to define whether I'm going to be an empathetic individual or not. And if my empathy is going to be low, then of course my capabilities of connecting with the other human beings is going to be low. And no matter what good MBA degree I may have acquired, at the end of the day, when I'll reach up to a level where I have to be empathetic as a leader, and I have to, make the human relations function, make sure that I am a good people's manager, the inability that I possess to comprehend, the inability that I possess to be empathetic, I think that would become my limitation in terms of being a true business leader, even if I'm talking about pure business functions. So empathy and all those, softer things that we talk of, soft skills as we use, many a times, they cannot be developed. They cannot be happening if I only read languages, I learn science, and I take math. The second challenge that I see is again in the structure, as I will come again. Very clearly, I was reading Aristotle writes somewhere that early childhood education is basically parents' responsibility. Back home here in India, we had a system where in the ancient times, the child would be going to the Gurukul only at a certain age. And we would begin that ritual at a pre-puberty stage, roughly 8 to 9 years of age, where we would say, okay, now the Upnayan is going to be done, which means now you're ready to go for higher education or education, formal education to a Gurukul. And before that, those formative years are basically for passing on the moral values, the value systems, the ethics, which are a responsibility of the parents. So one structural disruption that has happened in our schools today is, I was just seeing one of these, I'm sure many of you must be watching it, the KBC Children's Special. I was just, I think this week it's going on. I was watching it. 9-year-old child is in grade 5. While on CBSE norms, it says that 6-year-old child should be admitted to school grade 1. When I studied in my school, I remember when I was appearing for my board examinations, I was asked to declare my date of birth once again when I was filling in the 10th standard board examination form, that what was my date of birth, and if I'm underage, I would not be allowed to give 10th standard examination. Yes, we do have prodigies, 13 years old who has done a master's degree and all that, fine. But by and large, I think the challenge with us is that we are talking about relegating the entire responsibility of those formative years only to the schools. And I think that's where there is a big problem. I think while we have gone, the social system has become such that we are passing our children to the creches. We are ensuring that they go to the school as early as possible, at the earliest age possible, so that the burden of making them into good human, into good professionals, if I may say so. I will not touch upon human beings or whatever. That is not going to be our responsibility. We are going to pay a certain fee to the school. The school is going to take care of it. Yeah. In the rural areas, you have a so-called Anganwadi center, which is supposed to be taking care of primary education or early childhood education. And how does that happen? I think it is everybody's guess. So what I'm saying is, structurally, we have put the children at a disadvantage right at the beginning itself, where we have kind of passed on the entire burden only on the schools or the either the creches or the what they call them as Montessori schools and so on and so forth, who are supposed to give curricular attainment also, who are supposed to give moral values also, and who are supposed to give everything. And what basically happens is that, therefore, the schools would be able to imbibe certain things, would be able to pass on certain things to the children, to the pupil, on the basis of a general template that they may possess. And many years later, the parents would be, then feeling shy or feeling bad about it, that children do not have the values that they possessed. I can hear this from so many of parents that, oh, our children don't know this, our children are not attuned to our culture, they don't know about our social systems and customs and rituals, they have no understanding of our religion. Well, you are at fault, because a school possibly cannot be focusing attention on each and every single individual to make sure that they can pass on that value system, that code of ethics, which you as a parent should have passed on, because that's what defines you as a family, that is what defines you as a community, that defines you as a constituent of the society, or follower of a certain religious practice or whatever, or faith. So I think that is a big structural challenge, that everything is being passed on to the schools, uh, believing that we would be, churning more and more money. We have become money spinning machines ourselves, and therefore we would be creating that wealth so that the children can get the best education, without even knowing what does that education per se mean. So I think that's a big social issue perhaps, but I think we need to still be cognizant of it and think a little bit about it. Now, if you talk about from a policy perspective, there is a major issue, at least in our country as I see it, the Anganwadi centers, uh, which are the fulcrum of early childhood education. And I think 80% of the country's children still go to the Anganwadi centers, where they get the midday meals, and they are supposed to be getting the first little bit of understanding of education, in the sense identifying colors, numbers, etc., etc. A, the pathetic situation of those Anganwadi centers. B, the little knowledge that the workers there know about what is the significance of their work, and how that entity itself is governed by two different kinds of line departments or two different ministries. You go further, you're talking about schools, which are again managed by another board. You go to colleges, they are managed by another, setup, and so on and so forth for the universities. So each entity which is supposed to be providing education is already siloed. It is managed by either a separate ministry or at least a separate department, maybe for the ease of operations or whatever. And if you add to it the complexity of technical education or skill education, then this is even more complex and dissociated. So when you're talking about uh, skill development, it is housed in the Ministry of Labor, and it has got nothing to do with Ministry of Education. I was, listening to. I will not name that individual. He's a politician today, but a very famous educationist. And he said something very interesting, which kind of stuck with me. Where he said that, in our country, we've created a whole range of institutions for people to take up tertiary education. But at the same time, the fallacy of our system is that we've not been able to even reach out and provide the basic primary education, a bare minimum standard across the entire country. And so, therefore, what's happening is, not everybody is required to be taking higher level education. Everybody may not be capable also of taking higher level education, but the system has become an inverted pyramid, where the focus on a bare minimum standard to be achieved for primary education and middle school education um, has been perhaps not focused so much, while there has been a whole plethora of focus on creating tertiary level institutions. So you've got a whole lot of management institutions and technical institutions, etc., which are mushrooming every other day. And at the end of the day, the primary education which needs to be really emphasized upon, because that's going to define, as I said, the holistic understanding of that individual, the holistic persona of that child, as he or she goes into secondary or tertiary education levels. I think the basic fundamental pillars, the building blocks, they are getting compromised. So you have a master's in finance, who doesn't know how to do his own household calculations. Uh, you know, I mean, there's a big change. I'm sure many of you must have gone through this exasperation that I've gone, where you're talking to somebody with all due respect, on a some kind of a BPO kind of a line, and the person on the other side is perhaps not being able to even comprehend the basic things that need to be taken care of. And it's a kind of a mechanized way in which they are approaching it, because they have stopped thinking that they have to go as per the SOP that has been defined for them. So I think these are the basic challenges which we need to be focusing upon. There are a whole range of issues which need to be looked at. uh, Thankfully now we are talking about vocational education and the new educational policy to be started right from the schools onward. It used to be earlier, later on it got removed. Now again they're talking of that it should be a part and parcel of education per se. I think these are the kind of changes, these are the kind of disruptions that I think the education system requires. uh, so I'm just trying to ignite your minds, give you those just share my exasperation in a sense that these are the things on which we need to be focusing on. I'll rest here and see if there are questions that need to be answered.
Thank you, Ashwini ji, for this like really powerful uh, opening statement or opening remark on how we need to kind of reimagine the values on which the education system is based on, and you've really taken us across centuries, also kind of helping us understand as to how traditionally education was envisaged in our civilizations, and how with global forces of economics and how transitions are happening because of economics on our society, uh, the way in which the expectations from the education system, both for the teachers as well as the parents especially, has been constantly changing, and it's kind of becoming counterproductive as well. So thank you for kind of helping us unpack all these very complex issues and how they impact education. And you also touched upon how education, and especially the early years in schools and the Anganwadis, how the challenges and the administrative structural barriers which kind of sometimes become counterproductive as well. And this is also something which we would like to learn more from you about, as to how what experience has been for the JSW Foundation with respect to work on this. So to begin with, uh, we understand that how you talked about, there are these schisms or these kind of the lack of bridging between how the family and the early years and then the early grades, and you talked about how there are these different administrative structures of different ministries, and like the motivation levels are kind of very low, especially for all many of the stakeholders. We have the national education policy, which also identifies this as a problem and talks about bridging the early years, early childhood education with the early years in school. What is your assessment of what the national education policy is saying? Do you feel that it is sufficient, and how can that be actually implemented on the ground? Your thoughts on that, please.
See, I would say every policy that is designed has a very good intent. The problem is not about policy. To me, the basic issue is about how that policy is actually implemented and what do we monitor. When we are implementing a policy, uh, when the execution is happening, how are we monitoring that execution? And what are those parameters that we are using while we are doing that measurement? So I think that's where the challenge is. And I just to give you a small example, I was reading somewhere that early childhood education, why is it important? Because and why is it so well connected, the whole reason of Anganwadi centers giving midday meals? It was a one part. I think it has been captured in that book by Professor Amartya Sen, where he says that the Anganwadi centers providing midday meals actually ensured that the children are coming to the school. That's just one part of the story. There's a whole lot of research which says that the formative years of the brain of a child would be not developed fully if undernourishment happens. Now we'll have to we'll have to create a disruption at that level itself. At least in our foundation's work, wherever we are working, we've been very clear. I said, if we are working on early childhood education, early childhood nutrition also needs to be tackled at the same time. If you do not do these two things at the same time at the Anganwadi center, it will not work, because invariably these children would be coming from already impoverished families. So they already have a nutrition burden upon themselves. And if you do not ensure the right kind of nutrition for them when they are coming to the schools or the Anganwadi centers for the first time, lower nutrition levels are going to ensure that they remain underperformers. There is a very strong correlation. There is a very strong correlation, and it has been done across the Indian subcontinent also. It has been done by a lot of researchers in African continent also. So I think it's not just about putting the bits and pieces together within the education itself, but it's about looking at a student, a child, as a uniform entity for which nurturing is required from a number of aspects. And for that, no matter what number of ministries you have to merge or how many line departments need to work together, some mechanism would have to be worked out. We are very strongly thinking on those ideas, and I can't preempt, but we are in the process of reaching out at least to one of the state governments that we would like to do an experiment. Please allow us to coordinate at least 3 or 4 line departments to do this kind of an experiment and tell you that this is really going to work. It actually is going to be an action based research.
Right. That we really look forward to learning more about that research, and maybe have you here again to share some of the findings. And another point which you made, and it's a very powerful point, that how over time parents, because of several factors, economic, social factors, are putting more and more responsibilities on the formal education system, right? And this starts from the very early years, creches and schools, as you also mentioned. What is your assessment as to, is this phenomena kind of focused on certain specific socioeconomic groups or regions, or do you feel that it is now like a wide-ranging phenomena? And if there is any variation in this particular idea that parents are giving more responsibility to their formal education systems, why is there any variation across regions? Any thoughts on that?
Um, you will not find variations, I would say, from a geography to a geography, but you would find variations, or I would say the underlying reasons from different socioeconomic status, one after the other. So, so all those students who are first time learners from their family, there is a basic fundamental challenge that the parents themselves are uneducated. So perhaps they cannot give you any support in terms of curricular attainment. Mind my words, what I'm trying to say. We did this experiment in one of our locations when I was with some other organization. We were trying to grapple with adult literacy at one point in that location, and we were also grappling with children, not knowing a lot many things about their own culture. And we said, why can't we do the two things at the same time? And we did this experiment in a few blocks, found it to be quite useful. That let the responsibility of the adults becoming literate so that they can sign their name and they can add a few numbers here and there be the responsibility of the young children, and let the responsibility of the adults be to impart moral values to the children through storytelling and through other medium as they deem fit. So you are trying to do two things at the same time: adult education, literacy, basically, acquisition of literacy, and moral values and systems to be passed on to children in a very natural storytelling process. See, it's a shame upon us as a country if we talk about literacy after 70 years of independence. We still have not been able to achieve literacy. What are we talking about? And we talk about education system in the country. So I think there are various reasons. So in poor families, the reason is that either they are themselves not educated enough, or they do not know what they can pass on to their children, what all they can pass on. So that's one part, which you'll find in rural areas, or you'll find in families which are having children going to the school perhaps for the first time. The second problem, which I believe is much more urban, or I would say it's more of a middle class problem, is about the economic pursuit. We all want to acquire material wealth, we all want to prosper, we want to have nice flats and a car and whatnot. The list of the wish list is quite long. And to achieve that wish list, it's a fact, A, the families have broken up, B, the families have to have two or more sets of earners to maintain that living standard, and therefore the neglect is always on the children. That's the way it is. So, for different reasons, different underlying factors, families or individuals are passing on this responsibility to the schools. We'll take care of your fees, you take care of my child. I think that's the kind of a relationship that's come up. Failing to realize that there are a whole lot of things that the schools perhaps will still not be able to do.
Right. Thank you, Ashwini for sharing your thoughts on that. And you really triggered a lot of thoughts and ideas around, like how often, education, which is, it is in a structure, and it is, of course, like, because if anything is to be done on a large scale, there has to be, like, we have a bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy looks at very specific technical things, and the nuts and bolts, and then making sure that it's implemented on a large scale. And you've talked about some very powerful ideas, for example, things like social justice, and the importance of, giving a human touch to our education, of going back to some of the traditional values of empathy, of community, right? So and so I wanted to understand a bit more about what JSW Foundation, and JSW Foundation is running the Vidya Mandirs as well, the schools. How has what has been the vision of these JSW schools in kind of trying to bring these values within the mainstream education system? What has been some of the successes, and also maybe some of the learnings from these experiments?
Uh, Thanks, Mikshul. So, in fact, this soul searching we started doing about few years back. We said, what should our schools be known for? What makes our schools different from the other schools? I mean, different in the sense not just because we want to be different, but what is that value addition that we can bring onto the table? So we kind of narrowed down on five key things, values or whatever word I may put them. First one was humility. Second one was honesty. Third one is trust. Fourth is kindness. And fifth, but the most important, is respecting nature. And so, therefore, these are the five core areas on which we believe that each child needs to be nurtured, and to create opportunities for them to imbibe these values and nurture those values, and maybe to some extent even go to an extent to see whether they are moving in the right direction or not. So a lot of things that we've tried to do is a uh, so this is one part, where we are talking about what needs to be there with the children. The second part is who's going to impart this education to the children. Of course, the teachers. If the teachers themselves do not demonstrate leadership skills, they would not be creating leaders down the line. So, therefore, a whole emphasis on teachers' capacity building itself. So, I can tell you that the teachers come back to us saying that a whole lot of programs are being done for us. We are hard pressed for time. So, therefore, please reduce some of these capacity building activities. I think that's the kind of a sign that we have sometimes received from people. So that's the second element. And third is that we've created, I would say, a whole range of systems by which this all can be nurtured. Music, for example. Music has been made as a mandatory additional subject across all schools. Uh, there's a whole lot of emphasis, and music is not about titillation. being able to sing two songs and playing a string of a guitar, and coming up quickly onto a local channel or something, or the nearest function that happens. We have relegated music to titillation. Music is nirakar brahm. I mean, that's what music is to us. Music is something which makes the Sufis gyrate into the pursuit of God. I mean, that is what music is all about. So we have belittled everything. We have tried to bring and commoditize, bring down the value of everything as much as we could have. So music is not just about playing a song or playing an instrument. It's about listening to the nature, knowing that music is all around, that understanding what is we did an experiment. What is biodiversity? It's a big fine word, but a whole range of flora which is available nearby, which your mom uses or which your grandmother uses. Let the children go and identify through an experiential learning how many kinds of spices are. Thankfully, we are in a place called Ratnagiri, and we did this during the COVID times. The children were made to go into small batches, go around their neighborhood, identify the leaves. There were a whole set of experts who would help them. Okay, do you know what this leaf is all about? This is so and so. This is a herb. It can have these medicinal values, and this is how you can use it. And this has been a part of your traditional knowledge. You never knew about it. Compiling all that together, turning it into a small little booklet, giving it to the children. They feel proud of a scrapbook that they've created, but it is not just a scrapbook where they simply went and plucked five different kinds of leaves and put them together. It's about making them know, respect their nature, and find value out of it. That, okay, this is why we need to nurture them. If this is so and so leaf, if this is so and so root, it is important from so and so point of view. So, creating a platform for children to experiment, learn, express themselves. uh, there are a whole range of mentoring systems that we've tried to create, in the sense that student to student mentoring, teacher to student mentoring, and teacher to teacher mentoring. So if there are 8 schools or 9 schools that we have, the schools themselves mentor each other as teachers and principals. They mentor each other. Uh, Showing empathy is not just by saying that this is empathy, learn the spelling. Each school takes up an initiative which is connected to, I would say, it's a social responsibility that the schools themselves take up. So during the COVID times, one of these schools, the teachers there, the principal there, the parents, and the students, they all volunteered to do activities by which they could help people in their neighborhood during COVID times. So whether it was getting resources, or whether it was going, doing awareness campaigns to people and so on and so forth, or running a small little, call center to help people. These were all activities done by the schools themselves, and it was not done by our directive from anywhere. It was something which the schools sat together as a community and they came up with these solutions. The third and fourth more important point is building that community, as I use the word, the teachers, the parents, some of the students, senior students. It has to be a vibrant community. If they do not talk to each other, if they do not figure out what the school needs to be and needs to go in what direction, I think the parent committees, the what you call that, the PMCs, the parent management committees in the schools, if they can be energized, they themselves become a big vehicle of change and positivity. So a number of ways by which you create structures and you create opportunities for people to come together. There's an exchange program every year. They need to go around. There are science conclaves that we do between one school and the other. Incidentally, one conclave which is done in Nagpur district is actually attended by almost like 400 odd schools of the Nagpur district itself. So creating those opportunities for people to come together, share experiences, a whole lot of counseling activities going on. Uh, so a lot of initiatives, I would say, in that sense, to create that teacher, family, student, connect, and make sure that this becomes a kind of part of the culture.
Mhm. Right. Thank you, Ashwinji, for sharing this. We're also getting some comments from our live audience. I think we have Astha who's saying that listening to such great thoughts, and we have another point from who's saying that thank you, Ashwiniji, very valuable thoughts. We need more people thinking this way, and uh, uh, also a realistic picture that you have presented here. I think one question we can take from the audience. what is your one favorite project that you have been involved in, and are there ways to replicate this experience and scale it up?
Um, I'll have to think. Lots of interesting things that I think the teams have done. To me, this medicinal plant thing that I talked to you, I think was very innovative, uh, and I don't think so that it requires much of an effort. Uh, One experiment that we did, I think in one earlier organization also where I worked, where we tried to connect, I would say, and I think it's very much scalable. Uh, where we said how we can connect curricular learning with experiential learning and fun learning. How do we connect all that? So and this remains to very close to my heart, and we're trying to replicate it as much as we can. The idea being that we picked up a theme for a particular year. So if the theme is biodiversity, for example, especially for students of grade 8, 9, 7, 8, 9, 10, for 4 years, let them understand and decipher and unlock the meaning of this word biodiversity. So if biodiversity is the theme, a set of experts from an institution which can help children and the teachers also, because you're talking about rural schools, to decipher what is the meaning of the biodiversity. It's a very heavy word, but if you start unshackling it, it's a very interesting subject as well. So what do you mean by biodiversity? What is its importance? What can you do about it? And so on and so forth. So taking rounds, and this would become a year long activity for the entire year, and this is a part of their curriculum also, by the way. So what they would do is they would look at the linkages of biodiversity with science. Say for example, biology, biodiversity, how is it connected to, say, chemistry, in a sense? How biodiversity is connected to sanitation? What are the positive and negative impacts of that? So they start understanding this whole subject, and then there is a sense of competition at the end of the year. The teams come together. Teams from 8 or 10 chosen schools, they would come together, they would confluence into a 1 day or 2 day kind of a fair, fun fair, where everything would be around biodiversity as the key theme. So there would be organizations, educational institutions who would come and who would demonstrate what are they doing in the space of biodiversity. There would be organizations, development institutions who would come and tell them, how biodiversity is important. There would be fun activities, experiments for children to, learn what is biodiversity and, kind of make a small little try about it. Some Vikram Sarabhai Center would be able to, share a film with us so that children can see how does the, world below the sea looks like, creating that thing. Small fun activities, for example, having a small, kind of a various spaces where there are photo booths. So children can go there and take a photograph with a dolphin, at least at the backdrop, things of that sort. Creating that excitement in them, and then announcing a new theme for the next year again. So next year the theme is space or astronomy. And then they start talking about planets and they start talking about things. And this year activity continues. At the culmination, everybody is trying to showcase what they've learned over the years. They are quite happy, and I would say feeling proud of what they've been able to achieve. And it creates that opportunity for the teachers and the students also to, kind of gel with each other, because when they're involved for a year long activity, it builds that, relationship much stronger. So it's not the schoolmaster only twisting your ears. It's the teacher who's, kind of acting as a mentor. So I think that's the kind of a project I'm sure can be replicated in a smaller or a greater degree by every school, by every community. I think it's very much possible.
So wonderful to hear about these stories as well. Ashwinji, in conclusion, I would like to ask you about you talked about teacher capacity building, and it is an important focus of the JSW Foundation as well. And the goal that the foundation is trying to achieve is very ambitious, because when we talk about teacher capacity building, we are talking about, okay, training them on content knowledge, pedagogy, classroom management, and things like this. But here we are talking about, like transforming human nature, talking about values. And, when we talk about children are, when they are young, they are very impressionable. So how you it's there's more traction, or there's more scope of helping them build those values. But teachers, they've already been through that process. Now they're adults, and they have certain beliefs as well. So how does your team approach the idea of teacher capacity building? Because teachers themselves have most teachers have been part of themselves of an education system which is like really broken, and it has not helped really kind of build or support the building of values themselves. Your thoughts on that?
See, A, if I may say so, there's a child in every one of us. You have to simply bring that child out. And that child has got an innate, desire to learn more, to have more fun, and to feel happy about what the child has achieved. You know, the first little letter that you might have written on a piece of paper, you must have very proudly gone and shown it to your mother. And so I think it's that child which is there in each one of us. Unfortunately, over a period of time, it gets damped and dulled out. So when we when we talk about teachers capacity building, it's not about a mundane course that they have to go through, or they have to kind of well, they do go for leadership courses with IIMs and all that. That's fine. That's to give them the arsenal, to delve more into themselves. But the entire focus on teachers capacity building and learning is about helping them identify themselves, decipher themselves as individuals, and then bring out what is their potential. So it's not about making them move from ladder A to position A to position B. It's about for them to understand for themselves how they can move from a certain position that they have for themselves in their mind. So it's more about, I would say, if I may crudely call it, a self-actualization kind of a thing. And thankfully, I would say we are blessed that we have got some fantastic teachers with us, some fantastic principals with us. And the culture, the informal culture, the I would say nurturing of the value as a family, as a community, I think those are the things that we are laying more emphasis upon, so that automatically it helps the teachers unfold their potential and utilize that potential. No big hurry. We have been doing teachers capacity building since 2016 onwards, and we would continue to do that. It never ends, it never stops. It's a continuous process. Improvement is a continuous process. You cannot be stopping it. Okay, so now the teacher is trained. So it's not a B.Ed degree, unfortunately. That once you acquire that degree, then you are trained and you don't need anything else. So it's a creating that refreshing sense of acquiring something new, doing something new, trying out something different, taking up a new challenge, taking up a new responsibility. A lot of peer-to-peer learning is what we are emphasizing upon. So I think those are the areas by which we are trying to do that. There is a very ambitious plan of teachers training at some point of time. Uh, let me talk about it at a later stage when we are fully ready with that plan. But it's certainly there. It seems. I think. Have I lost you, Mashood?